You're listening to the Light Over Time podcast with David Sargent and Korey Bartos. It is March 2nd. It is almost spring. Thank the stars.
So close.
2025, and we are getting a cold flash right now in Lansing, which isn't great. But we have a pretty gear-heavy episode for you guys. There's been some crazy announcements that we've been kind of excited about. Some gear news between the two of us and plenty of other stuff. So we're going to dive right into it. But as always, thanks for being here and saddle up because there's a lot going on. All right, so how are you, David?
I'm pretty good. Just getting over a cold, so I got myself a nice Americano, warming me up before we go outside and do fun family activities. I'm feeling good.
Perfect. All right, so like I said, it's been cold. I'm in love with this. I know I have said it in our Discord and I've said it in Instagram a little bit, but the A7CR and this 40 mil, I've shot everything that I've done at work for the last since I got this lens on this lens. Um, I think this is outstandingly underrated. I think f2.5 at a medium focal length is plenty of background blur on a full frame. I'm not missing it being faster. I'm not really like, man, I really wish I had like the 35 still or anything. Not really missing the 35 1.4. Not really missing the idea of a 50.
I'm surprised that's not smaller at 2.5.
I mean, it's pretty small, man. Like, it's the size of like the original. Here, actually, I have the Canon Nifty 50 here, and like it's pretty tiny. This is the DSLR Nifty 50,
Okay.
and they had to cram an aperture ring in it and stuff, so it's not
Oh, sure. Yeah.
it's got a AF/MF switch. It's got a freaking custom button, which is kind of crazy for a tiny little lens, and it
Oh,
also
yeah, that is.
it also has a clickable aperture, so you can declick it.
Okay.
So like
Kind of went extra on a 40.
it's ridiculous. But it's as fully featured as I would want a little baby lens, and it's
Cool.
not compromising on anything, and that's awesome. Um, I got it set up with the strap and the grip. I like having the grip off when I'm doing like walk around stuff, but this is kind of how I'm going to handle Tulum is running the 40, and then when we're doing anything with birds, I just switch over to the teleconverter and 70 to 200. So
Cool.
I've been trying to get used to it, carrying it around on that strap, like going to do errands and things like that. Something that I picked up in like shooting and tactical stuff is really finding time to see if your kit is set up in a way that's going to be comfortable for the long term. Um, if we change our holsters and belts and like where our magazines go and our plate carrier and stuff, it's really important to do normal task admin stuff. So like I'll be taking photos and stuff in full kit at work if I changed a bunch of stuff because you want to know where those pain points are before you get out training and running around and live fire
Yeah.
with plate carriers and stuff. So I kind of adopted that for camera gear. Like if I change a strap, if I change like some kind of mounting solution, if I'm playing with a new lens, sometimes I'll just carry it around even if I don't really intend to use it. Um, to find those like pain points early so I can try to mitigate them or change something to get it to be as comfortable as possible. So I can always have the camera with me, and it won't be a burden because again, the best camera you have is the one you're willing to take with you. Um, that said, the best camera is the one that you're willing to take with you. David's got some news for us.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it was. I told the news last show. I bought a ZF, and it has arrived.
yeah,
And I too have a 40 mil lens. Not my first 40 ever, but it is the first modern 40 I've ever used. And I haven't had a lot of time to use the 40 mil, although I do like it. It's a 40 millimeter f2. It is not the special edition that Nikon released. I just personally, once I started looking at that, aesthetically, it didn't really hit with me too much. So I went with the nice, just, regular 40 mil, and I'm not displeased with it. I did do some test shooting with that lens, and it's sharp enough. Although I'm going to get into a bunch of like what I like about the ZF, what I don't like about the ZF, specifically about the 40 mil f2, is I find it racks focus kind of slowly from front to
uh,
back. So I was curious how yours performs as far as focus speed front to back.
man, the Sony stuff is disgusting. It's as fast as any linear motor G Master. Like it's snappy. I've never
Yeah.
missed focus. It's dope.
I also didn't look up what's the price on the 42.5.
Um, what is it? I think full price is just over five.
Oh, okay. So that's like twice
It's
the 40 f2.
it's expensive, yeah, but
So
it is their G class lens, and
yeah,
they did want the optics to be good, and they did want the all the features in it. So
that being said, the 40 f2 then would be like an FE lens on Sony. It's
sure,
doesn't have a linear motor, I would guess, because it's not quick to focus, but also it's a 40. How quick do you need a 40 to focus? Like that's
yeah,
maybe in some situations. But anyway, yeah, I got the Nikon Zf. I have been enjoying it. Just start off with that. It's a really pleasant camera to use. There is just a lot to like about it, and a lot to like in compared to the A7 IV. And we'll kind of start with like usability.
yeah,
The first pain point, and it's the most obvious, is there is no grip.
right,
There is no grip, and it is plain uncomfortable to hold with a heavy setup for a long period of time.
right,
And that's just the reality of a camera that has no grip. So I plan on buying one of the grips that there's numerous for the
sure,
ZF. Neewer makes a really neat one for like $5 that makes it look like one of the FM cameras with a thin red stripe. I think that's pretty pleasant still and doesn't distract or take away from the design,
sure,
which is a big core aspect of why this camera even exists.
right, yeah. You don't want to kill the aesthetic of that camera.
Right. And if you're just listening and not watching, and maybe you don't know what the ZF looks like, it's a retro inspired full frame camera. Think like a lot of the newer Fujifilm cameras, like the XT line. They've got most of the dials on the camera and not like selectable inside the camera, which they probably also are. But you've got your ISO dial, you've got your shutter speed dial, I've got an exposure compensation dial, and then I have two more customizable dials on the front and the back. So this camera just loves its dials.
Yeah,
My other, we'll just jump right into this because it's the biggest one for me. When I was testing this out with the 150 to 600, that lens, doing wildlife specifically, is the time when I want auto ISO most frequently.
sure,
And then I also want to be able to switch from auto ISO to having ISO not be automatic most frequently. When it's like a cloudy day, I'll leave it on auto ISO. When it's a sunny day, I'll leave it on auto ISO. But when it's cloudy and then sunny, and then I'm like going in and out of places, and for a short period of time, I just want to control the ISO myself.
sure,
There is like this one little issue. So I love the dials. It's why I bought the camera, right? Like this retro style camera. I think it speaks to a lot of people. The dial for ISO goes 100, 200, 400, 800, all the way up to 51,200. And then there's a C selection on that dial. There's not an automatic selection. There's a C selection. And what the C selection allows you to do is it allows the camera internally to control the ISO, which is like, okay. And so I started digging around. And if you want to turn on auto ISO, you have to do so one of two ways. You can do it through the main menu in the Nikon body, in the ZF body, or you can then burn the only custom button you have
oof,
to control ISO, and then while holding that custom button, use one of the front dials, one of the two customizable front dials to turn on or turn off auto ISO. Not even in the quick I menu, like Sony's FN menu, the I menu for the ZF, there is ISO control, and auto ISO, you can see it, but it's grayed out. So not even in the I menu can you turn on or off auto ISO, even when the C selector is on the dial. This is a little bit like digging in here to find this one, but I use auto ISO a lot and I switch it on and off a lot. So my biggest pain point there was, oh man, I actually have to burn the only custom button I have on the body to control ISO, even though there's an ISO dial. If they had just put auto in the dial, I'd have been happy.
yeah. That's really brutal. I didn't realize that was the case.
Yeah.
I know, like I have started to use auto ISO. I was like super against it for the longest time. I don't know why. I just feel like it was the one thing that I didn't want to go crazy, especially when you have, lesser low light capability. Like
Yeah.
if you can't really push past 2500 or whatever, it gets pretty obnoxious. But
Yeah.
obviously with these new cameras and birding especially,
Mhm.
that wildlife is just brutal because you go from literally the way your super telephoto is facing, the light can be several stops difference. So
Definitely. Yeah, and I do want to be clear. You can customize all of this, like pretty much all of the buttons that are set to do something. They're all customizable, and I have changed two buttons, but I don't want to do that if I didn't have to. And so I think it would have been okay for Nikon to put one more customizable button on this thing, but I would have preferred if there was an A on that dial for automatic.
yeah,
That would have been great. Outside of that, I can probably get used to that. Just like getting used to not having a thumbstick.
right.
This camera doesn't have a thumbstick.
Yeah.
But customization in this body is kind of ridiculous. You can customize this quite a bit. So you can customize what the LCD screen does, and you can then use the LCD screen to do to help you with focus tracking and things like that, and how fast and whatnot. Excuse me. But there was one other thing that I really, really, really disliked about this camera once I started using it with a longer lens, because there is no grip. My right hand, when I'm holding this camera, and I'm right-handed, I'm dominant with that hand, is so used to pressing the playback button with my right thumb, but they put the playback button on the left side.
Yeah.
And so if I'm taking pictures and I really quickly, I don't want to take my left hand off if I'm like looking at a bird and I want to quickly check focus on something. I have to take my right hand off and reach over and hit the playback button on the left side if I want to maintain that lens position, right?
That's the case on a lot of Nikons, though, isn't it?
I don't remember it being such an issue. So
Yeah,
maybe it wasn't that on
I
the
think that
D850.
probably not the D850, but I think I'm used to it from their like crop bodies. I'm pretty sure like the 7000 series and stuff has the playback on the left side.
I'll have to look at my daughter's D3200, but I don't remember it being such an issue.
Yeah.
But there's workarounds.
Sure.
So the first one I did was I changed the playback button and the display button to
Mhm.
just switch. So the display button cycles through what's displayed on the live view, and then the playback button, obviously. So I switched those two, and so now very easily, if I hit display, I can do playback, which is great. Nikon, there's way more customization than I ever remember there being in Nikons, and it even feels like quite a bit more than what's allowed in the Sonys, even though the menus seem simpler in the Nikons. I don't know. Anyway, but also, if you're using one of those longer lenses for birding, they often have custom buttons. And so I set one of the custom buttons on the 150 to 600 to initiate playback, which is pretty cool. I didn't realize I could do it from there. And so my left thumb rests pretty naturally close to that one custom button, and I can very quickly hit playback from there. So that's mitigated. But I do have further observations.
Yeah.
So just give me 1 second. And I'll rattle them off here. The LCD, oh, it's better. It's bigger. It's brighter. Is it brighter? It is so much brighter. The LCD, not the viewfinder. The viewfinder's not quite brighter. Maybe it's a little bit brighter, but the LCD, bigger and brighter. It seems more often like it's refreshing a little bit faster, which is great. It is just an entirely better experience. On the ZF, it's the same style, like swivel rotational style as the A7 IV, but man, the panel itself is brighter, more clear. Love that panel. ZF, the LCD is great. It does have pre-capture, something I figured out only, and I'll go over this real quick. There's 14 frames per second mechanical on the ZF, 10 frames per second mechanical on the A7 IV, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
15 frames per second electronic in high plus mode. But then you have a C30 mode, which is electronic only, and then gives you 30 frames per second, but in a lower res, lower quality JPEG only. This is okay, but that's the only mode pre-capture works in. And the readout speed is not great.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I tested it. Pre-capture is really cool. You can set for like a third of a second between that and 1 second as you're half pressing the shutter for pre-capture to take pictures. That's sweet. I want that. I just want that, not in a dumbed down resolution.
Yeah.
And also, if I'm going to have it, I really don't want to have to use a slow readout speed electronic shutter to do it in.
Right. Exactly. That's
So it's
like
kind of like
it defeats the purpose almost.
it defeats the purpose.
Caveats are brutal. Yeah. The pre-capture experience on the A7 9 or the A9 III is remarkable, and I definitely it's not enough for me to spend that much money on a body, but yet, quote unquote,
Yeah.
yet. But it is pretty remarkable. I would like to see even a little bit of that on a would be A75. So I feel you.
Yeah, and I have to imagine these little nuanced things that sports and wildlife people, those are going to be the little things that end up being big things for them,
Yeah.
which I think is an area for Sony to gain a lot of ground in. Maybe not for the masses, but it's an area because cameras are so good these days. They got to find something. Okay.
Right.
So yes, having pre-capture is cool, but it's if I had this camera on a tripod, a gimbal, a monopod, maybe that would be something I would use, but not handheld.
Yeah.
At 600 mil, it's useless. The camera is very tactile. It's just pleasant to use. Kind of went over that. The dials are so clicky, man. They're so clicky. The shutter sounds so good when you're in 15 frames, 14 frames per second. Firing that off, it's very, very pleasant. It's built very solidly. It's heavier than the A7 IV. It feels very intentionally built. There's just every little aspect of the camera feels like someone thought about its placement, maybe except for playback. um, but that's debatable, right? Like,
Right.
who practically wants to put a 600 mil type lens on a camera without a grip? Like,
Right.
that's like, so maybe they did think about it and said, we'll just take the odds on who's going to use this camera for what. And then the black and white lever is really awesome to have.
Sure.
So there is a lever here for photo mode, video mode, and black and white is the third position on that lever.
Mm.
And as you probably know, for listeners who maybe don't, if you use that mode, you're still taking a raw photo. It's still going to save it in a color mode, but all it is doing is applying a color preset to the JPEG preview on camera. So what it's going to show you on camera is your black and white, and you're able to compose in black and white, but you have that color raw that go into software later and turn it back into black and white. You can shoot in JPEG, and one of the things I really like about this camera is it allows you to download profiles. There's a website, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there's like a community profiles that people have made film sim stuff for, and I was able to do that. And so I've got a bunch of film sims that I can shoot in JPEG if I want and not touch it if I really like it. But I have been using what is it, deep monochrome, and then I just adjusted it a little bit. It's been a joy to use. I got a little taste of that when I did it with the A7 IV before this ZF came to me, and I'm gonna do that more because it's a very enjoyable experience to kind of like see in black and white as you're
Yeah.
shooting
Yeah, for sure.
in certain situations. Okay, so that's most of the pros. I went over some of the cons here. Let me see. Yeah, I would have enjoyed one more customizable button. I missed the playback scroll. So the D-pad, I guess you would call it, around the OK button
Yeah.
doesn't scroll like it does on the Sony's.
Right.
Miss that. I definitely can get used to that. There's let's see. Oh, the wheels, let's see, these dial wheels here, front and back, they don't protrude very, very far. And so I don't know if that's a design choice or not. But it feels to me like that if there's anything that's not very tactile about that camera, it's that those wheels could have been a little bit more forward
I
to
think
grip.
yeah, I've heard a lot of people talk about them. It's kind of a balancing act because it's really easy for those to be bumpable. And then you're
Oh, sure.
changing your stuff all the time. And without that grip to kind of block the, you know, things from like hitting them or whatever, it's that flatter profile of that body, if they protruded much, would be pretty tough because you'd be bumping your settings even if you were like slinging it to the side for a few seconds or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, there was one, I don't know if it's a software bug. I don't know if it can be fixed or if it's just a characteristic about the live view. But when I was testing and I read this online and then I was able to replicate with a shutter speed below like 1/250th of a second, high ISO, basically trying to shoot in the dark using the LCD screen. I was able to replicate this. I'm gonna call it a bug for now, where the screen refresh rate goes way down and it looks very laggy. Um, out if I bumped it just above 1/250th of a second, It's very quick, very like when you're moving the screen around and you're looking at it, um, it follows very quickly. But in the very specific case where it was like 1/125th of a second, sometimes it was only a handful of times, and I tried this over and over and over again. Just like I don't know, maybe 2 out of 10 times. Sometimes the screen would just get really laggy, and until I changed the settings. So I don't know what that is. I don't know if it
Uh,
can be fixed.
Yeah, that's odd.
And then I have some other usage notes. So adapted 150 to 600. I did get the Viltrox adapter.
Yeah.
At first, I was like, "This is totally fine for 99 bucks. It's the cheapest one." I did notice, because you have to notice this right away. It feels pretty thin. It feels pretty flimsy. Here it is on the what
Oh
is this? The
wow. Yeah.
Helios lens. Like that is pretty thin. And then the lever to release the lens from it, it feels like it's gonna break. Like I don't understand it really,
Fair.
but it's got electronic contacts, and that's great because one of the things that the ZF has that I love is that there's this function where you're in manual focus mode, where the eye autofocus will still work to find an eye, and then you can punch in immediately on an eye when you hit the zoom in button when it does this on a manual focus lens. So as soon as you um, start trying to focus, or anytime you hit that zoom in button and see if your eye's in focus, it is a very quick way to get in focus on a manual focus lens, especially on the Helios where focusing isn't really that pleasant. Mine is quite tight, but
Yeah.
and kind of a long throw to focus. So that's nice to have. But adapted 150 to 600, when the adapter was working fine, I had no problems.
Yeah.
It seemed like the ZF autofocus performance was at least on par with the A7 V, which is nice coming from the D850, where I loved everything about that camera except the autofocus,
Right.
and remembering why I switched at all, because
Yeah.
I still have such fond memories of that camera, but I do remember why I switched, and it was for autofocus. So
I would
the
hope
Z,
that that would be the case. I was really hoping that the
yeah,
ZF feels like what we liked from our A7 IVs
yeah,
in a Nikon with a cool body. Like,
but yes, and
yeah.
that's true. However, I bought the A7 IV like 5 years ago, right?
Right,
Four
yeah,
years ago.
for sure.
And so it feels as though that it probably should be a little better, but this is only a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I've only done this type of test. Again, it's an adapted lens. It's a Sigma lens, so it's like it's not native, it's not first party, it's on the cheapest adapter. So take all of that with a grain of salt.
Right.
It still felt at least on par with the A7 IV though. So that tells me
That's
perhaps
surprising.
there's room for it to be even better.
Right.
And so yes, the Viltrox adapter, I think I'm going to keep it just for maybe keeping it on these older manual focus lenses.
Sure.
But I'm probably going to end up getting a different adapter. Uh, let's see. Able to assign C1 on 150.
I did have a
Oh yes,
question
the playback.
about it.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, is this camera the one that has a micro SD and
Yep.
a full size SD?
Yep.
Have
It's
you
got-
have you tested that? Have you thrown a micro SD in it yet?
No, I do have another micro SD, but I don't think this is going to be the camera where I care.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. I've been running one SD in the A7 CR, and it's not been a big deal. I think it's nice that there's a micro SD in
Yep.
case you for like the 10% or 5% or 1% that you will care. I was just curious about running photos into both cards and seeing.
If I were to do it, and maybe I will if I really get comfortable with this camera and take it on jobs, I would do it where the micro SD is taking JPEGs and not doubling up on RAWs. Maybe I'm
Sure.
not sure. Um, it's not that I don't trust micro SD, but the industry seems to think that they are less reliable and
Sure.
slower.
Yeah. You can't fight that. Yeah.
There's less circuitry. There's less there. So I don't know that I can. But I do have a few from the drone, and I can take one and try it out. This might be an issue with this being the cheapest adapter, but I think I told you about this. It seemed to me that there was noticeable light leak
Yeah.
at the long end of 150 to 600. I'm for now going to chalk that up to the adapter. and only because that's what I read online was
Yeah.
that adapters can do this. I was not sure if you've ever used an adapter or maybe a teleconverter with a long lens to
Uh,
see something like
I
this.
I was running all adapted lenses on my Micro Four Thirds cameras forever, but all of mine were pretty good. Like I was getting like the high-end Metabones adapters and stuff, so I never really had an issue with that. Especially the
Okay.
Metabones
Yeah.
were also focal reducers, so they had glass in them.
Yeah.
But even with the like 100 to 400 Canons and stuff I ran on my GH4, it never was a huge issue.
Yeah. So for me, I'm gonna chalk this up to the Viltrax adapter right now.
Sure.
But I noticed a noticeable amount of like just a soft, low contrast haze over the image, and I know that I'm reducing megapixels by a significant amount as well. I'm able to see that difference, and that's just what I'm noticing. So for now, I'm going to keep the A7 IV as my birding lens until I decide to do something different in that department. Subject detection, and again, for now, I have to just leave this up to perhaps adapter stuff.
Sure.
Subject detection seemed hit or miss. Okay. Um, I would say as good as the A7 IV, except I can't seem to understand if the ZF is or isn't supposed to be able to detect the eyes on an animal. I think I sent you stuff that I was shooting the turkeys with,
Yeah.
and it was picking up the body of the turkey and tracking the body of a turkey. But the body, the abdomen of a turkey, is not where the eyes are all the time, and I
Right.
really would prefer it to try to just stay on the eyes. It never once tried to find the eye of a turkey. To the ZF's credit, a turkey's head looks really strange.
Yeah.
So maybe it was not the. But I was shooting other birds, and I never noticed where it. I didn't notice where it flipped into IAF on a bird. It just always found a bird and tracked around the bird body. Whereas on the A7 IV, it's very easy to identify when it's going bird IAF. You know?
Yeah, and I do have a little bit of beef with that because maybe it's just because I rented the really high-end cameras, and I think I said on this show the A1 is just so much better at finding
Yeah.
small subjects' eyes, like just honing in on something. But the A7 IV is really hit or miss. I don't get it. And
Yeah,
I have a native Sony lens, like
I would
doing my
agree.
bird stuff, and it just feels like I'm like, hey, I'm like filling the frame, and it's a cardinal. It's not like a
Right.
dark bird. Like, how are you not hitting the eye more often?
So, am I crazy to think that um, I'm not asking too much
I mean,
for
no.
a $2,000 camera? I want it to. If it's gonna have. I just don't even know if it has the capability. I wasn't able to confirm if it was ever trying to pick up the eye.
Well, and I will say with other adapted, like, because I've used the Sigma MC11 adapters and stuff like that, and you do lose some micro, like, functionality
Okay.
in ways that you just wouldn't really expect. Totally possible that adapting a long lens on there is just not going to be able to do the eye stuff. It just knows that it doesn't have it, and it's not going to do it. So,
Yeah. One other small thing that I noticed when I got back into what is it? The software. What am I using now? What is it called? One
on one,
something. On one. There we go. The software thinks that any lens I'm adapting is an 85 millimeter lens,
yeah,
and
that's
so
annoying.
I'm not sure if it's the software that is thinking wrong or if the adapter is communicating wrongly to the camera. And if that's the case, that might be an issue because the vibration reduction might be affected heavily. And I know this because I was adapting something else. What was I adapting? Um, it might have been this Helios lens I was trying to figure out first with because it doesn't have lens stabilization in the lens. Um, it was thinking that this 58 millimeter lens was an 85 millimeter lens, and the vibration reduction was feeling really wonky. And so I went into the you can customize
Sure.
the VR with a non CPU lens, and then you can plug in the millimeters, and then that fixed it. And so now I'm wondering if I was having any issues at all, if my camera was thinking it was an 85 millimeter lens, uh, talking about the 150 to 600 at 600 millimeters, the lens was doing lens reduction or vibration reduction stuff. But then, like, going back to IBIS, was the IBIS thinking it was 85, trying to correct with what's coming through? Like, were they battling there? I'm not sure.
So
So
so when you have the 100, 150 to 600, you can't customize the vibration reduction?
you ooh, I'm not sure if I tried because it isn't a non-CPU lens,
Right.
So I'm not sure. It's just very strange to me because no matter what lens I did adapt, except the 40 because it's not adapted, it on one at least thinks it's an 85 millimeter lens. I'm gonna have to look in the metadata outside of on one and see if that's still the same.
Yeah,
So that's just something I noticed.
because it could be Viltrox firmware for that for the electronics.
True, maybe
That it's reading the Viltrox as an 85, and that's just how they have something in their firmware.
Yep, yep, that might be true. There is a way to update that, although they use this very strange 4-pin connector. But I'll look into that. Um, and then that's about it. Rolling shutter was just as bad on this as the A7 IV.
Yeah. As
That's it. I haven't had a lot of time to use the native 40 on this. I will. I love I love using it. I've been using it at home. I did one portrait session with my wife with both the Helios 58 and then adapted the 51.4 Sigma. The 51.4 Sigma performed very well. It's just that also the Viltrox adapter seems to lose contact with the contacts often enough to be very annoying that I have to turn the camera off, take the adapter off, and then put it back on, and then usually that fixes it. But that's a very annoying thing to have to do, so I'm probably another reason to buy a better adapter. But when it worked, it was great. Autofocus worked great. Didn't notice any ghostly defects with the 50 mil. Yeah, so far I've had a pretty good experience, and a lot of the issues that I'm seeing, I think I can attribute to a cheap adapter. So far.
yeah,
So I wish I had more for you. I wish I had a native long lens to really
yeah.
test good autofocus. And I feel like I might rent something, but we're just not there yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely cool um to see one a freaking third party adapter not be awful and like mostly usable. You didn't speak too much on its compatibility with the 28 to 105. Do you have
Oh yeah,
any like follow-ups on that?
I took it out twice trying to use the 28 to 105. I had initially, um, it seemed fine. Um, I will say it seemed like at first I thought that it was slow to focus like the 40 f2 front to back. Um, and then I was like, this seems a little bit slower. And so I put it back on the S7 IV and it was about the same.
Really?
So it seems okay. I didn't really have an issue other than a couple of times the contacts disconnected.
Yeah.
So I think with a good adapter, that lens would be totally viable too. I did take some pictures, but nothing that I really stayed with and edited with too much. So I wasn't really able to dig into some files
Sure.
for the 28 to 105, but just shooting, I did shoot a couple and back of the screen. Everything looked okay. Like VR seemed fine, and autofocus seemed fine. So
Yeah, fair enough. I feel like 85 probably splits the difference on a 28 to 105 enough that it
yeah.
didn't, you're going to get really bad
Oh, that's right, because
experience.
that lens doesn't have in stabilization built in. So
Correct.
if that's true, I'm gonna have to look into that. Because if that's true, then how do I alleviate that if it's thinking it's an 85? And maybe it's doing just fine.
I think
But
I think if you're staying between 50 and 105 and it's saying 85, you're probably okay. Um,
yeah,
Obviously, if you have a lens with VR and you're really telephoto and it's fighting it, just like any micro vibrations of you holding a very telephoto lens, you're just going to see and experience
right,
a bad time.
right.
When you're in those like normal ranges, having experience using IBIS and stuff with adapters on like my Panasonics and things like that, it's rare that, and Panasonic's IBIS is incredible, so maybe that's something, but
Mhm.
it's generally going to kind of shake out pretty okay if you're within 25 to 30,
Yeah,
millimeters as far as the VR is concerned, especially because you're not like doing this, right? Like, I
yeah,
imagine you're like still trying to have good form. So, um,
right.
it's not fighting too much. Though, not surprising that if the build on the Viltrox is a little shoddy, that such a heavy lens like the 28 to 105 is also having some contact issues because the tolerances are not going to be met, or the materials even. You're talking metal on metal. Those
Right.
tolerances have to be pretty tight on metal to metal to stay.
Yep.
It's actually incredible knowing what I know about manufacturing the stuff we do for work. The fact that you can get those bayonets to really lock in like they do make them is pretty wild. So
If I can make one more just note about the ZF,
yeah,
I thought it's almost ironic, quite funny that Nikon chose the ZF as a test bed of multiple new technologies that they put into a camera. One notable one that I really wish I could have tested, but again, adapter. I wish I had a native lens to really test this feature because that's where I would really see it. Is it has this function where you can move the axis point of the vibration reduction in body
yeah.
on the IBIS, and it will move the point of the axis to where your focus point is.
Yeah.
I think at the longest focal lengths, this is where it's going to matter the most. Does that seem right to you?
Um, I think it's going to be where it works the most for sure. I don't know about that. I know how it could be bad, but I don't know how it could be good. It feels like to me like it would exacerbate certain issues that Canon has. So say you're at 16 and it picks a spot up in like the left upper quadrant, you're probably going to get more of that like
Yeah.
shifty wobble because you're experiencing distortion on the ends. But
Uh-huh.
because you're so telephoto and you don't have that kind of distortion, I bet that'll be like very mitigated. So I imagine it'll have a benefit. I don't know if it'll be like drastically good, but I imagine it probably has a good effect.
I left it turned on. Couldn't really tell if it was working or not, if
Sure.
I'm totally honest.
Well, and I don't know how powerful. I don't know how Nikon IBIS stacks up to the other competitors.
The ZF reportedly has 8 stops.
Yeah, I mean, but we know that the reportedly versus the
Yeah.
implementation is very different, right? Like, um,
Yeah.
Sony is still just okay, and
It
things
feels
like
great
that.
on the
So
40, if that means anything, but it's
yeah,
40, so
yeah,
who knows?
which is where it's easiest is to
Yeah.
get that like standard range to even it out. You're not dealing
Yeah.
with a lot of distortion. You're not dealing with a lot of stuff. So, which is why it's so easy to shoot in those focal ranges. Which is why it's everybody's daily.
Yeah.
But right on. It's definitely exciting. One to have some new kit to talk about. We've been talking about the ZF for 2 years, or whatever, forever it feels like. Um, and yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I'm excited to see what will eventually happen. Um,
Yeah.
getting
I'm excited. Sorry, I am excited. There is manual focus lenses that I really want to try. Voigtlander.
yeah,
There's a bunch of stuff on that mount that seems to be really solid in that space. Um, yeah, I am excited too. It maybe it seems like I harped a little too much on the ZF. I just got it. There's a lot of learning I got to do. It's
yeah,
for a camera from a system that I have like 5 or 6 years experience with. Um, it's got the biggest learning curve, and I
mm,
came from a D850, so I'm not sure what that says.
yeah,
Um, there's there's just a lot in there to
yeah.
figure out. So
Well, and I wouldn't say that you're harping on it. I think being critical about something that you bought is important, right? Like I don't want to hear somebody be like, "I just got this new camera. It's actually the best thing I've ever had." Because like
right,
that's
sure,
that's how it is, I'm sure. But
yeah,
people want the self validation that all the money they spent was good. But
totally,
when we're looking for tools versus some other stuff, blah 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 blah, we get it. But I will say to kind of put a button on that is there is a lot to be said for all of the people talking about having a camera for the experience to getting you to shoot to what I mean, like there's
100%.
so many creators and stuff like that that shoot Sony or they shoot Canon, but they flirt with like the X106 and they flirt with the Leica, because they
Yeah,
can, the 43, me with the A7CR. if you're going if you're not going to take your camera out because it's not exciting to use, you're not going to take your camera out because it's not exciting to use. That's kind of the mid-tier Sony stuff is just a good workhorse. It's not sexy. It's not
Right.
cool. You're not like, oh yeah, it does a really good job at what it's doing, and it became kind of ubiquitous. We've had them for a long time. We've been using them for years, so it doesn't really spark joy as, you know,
Yeah.
it once did. So
Completely.
it is nice to be able to reframe and do that. That's why I'm always changing my kit because I want to be shooting and I want it to be exciting.
Okay, we can move on.
Lots of gear stuff, and this might go over an hour, but we'll try to burn through some of this because all this isn't really that important. We're not going to have firsthand, you know, experience with any of this stuff yet. But
Yeah.
Sigma and Sony both had two pretty big releases. The Sigma one was interesting, and I guess I'll just kind of break down my experience with seeing this launch. One, I do not know why they went with like the made in China almost serif font. So Sigma has changed their logo. They're changing kind of their ethos. They're doing a lot right now, which feels like it's a positive thing because
Love the packaging, by the way.
I still haven't looked at the packaging, but you did
Oh.
mention that it's pretty epic. But like I really like the sport and contemporary and art lens design where they took it.
Oh yeah, I thought it was totally fine.
I
I don't
thought
really
it I
understand
thought
why they
it
changed anything.
I thought it like went right up. It became this like premium. It's the visual language of all of their designs became an an L series Canon lens vibe. Like when I saw it, I knew it was a Sigma. I knew it meant quality. They have their little silver circle, even if down to the contemporaries. Like it was a
Yeah.
really clean thing. I liked the like sans serif font that they had. Everything looked really really nice. But unfortunately, Yang Nuo and all the other like random companies that just like mass produce Chinese stuff always tend to use this like I don't know if it's like a operating system, the serif font that's attributed to whatever their language characters are, and that's what it reminds me of, which is unfortunate because for American consumers, generally that means that it was like a cheap Chinese made product.
Right. A little generic.
Yeah, like it's super generic, mass produced from a big,
I don't disagree with you.
so that's a little. It'll take some getting used to, I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they released a wild camera, um, probably one of the gnarliest like all around lenses for like APS-C that I've seen in a while. It's
Yeah.
16 to 300 f3.5 to 6.3 I think, but it's a 24 to 450 lens basically, for all the crops. So Fuji for E mount, for L mount, etc. And I guess that one's going to be out on RF as well because they do crop stuff for RF.
Yeah, you would think so.
Yeah, I think it is. And then this big daddy just like coming for every company ever, $6,000 300 to 600 f4. Now, looking at the comparisons that went up because Sony Alpha Rumors has some images comparing the size of the 600 f4 from Sony, the 300 to 600 f4, and the 200 to 600 that I have. It's massive. I mean,
The behemoth.
we know that it's 9 pounds. We know that it was huge. This is like when Jared Polin is saying that he's not hand holding this with his like obnoxious, stupid "I lift all the time" vibes. You know it's heavy. You know it's serious business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's beautiful. It looks completely professional. The biggest downside is one, it's probably not going to come to Canon or Nikon, and it's probably going to be locked in on those Sony cameras to 15 FPS.
Yeah.
So I mean,
That hurts.
I guess if you have like an SL3 or like one of the new Panasonics, you can get away from 15 only. I guess there's going to be some L mount dudes who are like burden in sports like fast awesome stuff soon because I don't think, yeah, Leica definitely doesn't, and I don't think Sony or Panasonic has like a really nice professional huge lens.
Yeah.
So that's epic for them.
I'm a question for you.
Yeah.
So Nikon and Canon, the full frame mounts are still relatively locked down, Canon more so. Do you think a release like this from Sigma, knowing they make excellent glass now, and we have yet to see the real performance behind this 300 to 600, do you think this affirms uh their position on keeping that mount locked up?
Oh yeah.
Because do you think they would sell a lot less 600 f4s on first party with
Um,
this thing?
I think Canon would struggle to sell some of their really expensive long glass. um, Nikon would like people would be buying Z9s for this lens. Like you would,
Yeah.
if this was on Z mount, you would see Z9s in this lens at every sports event, at the Olympics. Like you would see it. There would be.
With a very, very reliable adapter, we will see it.
I mean, yeah, we'll see about that.
We'll see. We'll
I,
see.
I,
Somebody will do it.
I know you desperately want an adapter to work for this thing,
I just want to see it in the wild. I'm
yeah,
oh,
and we'll get into that. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really hard for Canon, who already has a sour, taste in their mouth about
yeah.
opening their full frame, to open this. This crushes most of the competition without even seeing anything, because if it performs like any of their sports lenses should do, it's perfectly fine. It's going to have a high hit rate. It's going to have, good VR. It's going to have everything that it needs. It's going to have everything that anybody that's going to use and pay $6,000 for the most professional, like a 300 to 600 f4. Can we just talk about how crazy that is?
This is like the perfect lens for any sideline sport.
Yeah. This
Any
is
outdoor, even not even outdoor. F4 is awesome.
yeah, f4 300. If they made a 300 f4, people would want it
Yeah.
because it'd be super cheap. But it's
I am curious if we genuinely think we believe Sigma when they said this is good for portraits too. I remember them saying that.
I don't I don't know. I don't know that that's. I can't remember if that was them. I need to go
This cannot be that lens.
reinvest. Yeah.
It's great for wildlife.
Yeah.
They're not wrong there. I'm not taking this to a portrait session.
Yeah. I might. Um, but what was interesting is on that little size comparison imagery, they also showed the 500 f5.6, and it made me go, "Oh, actually, that's super sick. I
Yeah.
should probably." And
It
that's
is.
less than $3,000.
Yeah.
And so, like, f4 to f5.6 isn't that bad. The
And
size is
Nikon
like,
has a 400 4.5 that's about that price too.
yeah, that's pretty good too. 400's
Yeah.
getting a little
I
short,
know.
but
Yeah.
um, but yeah, that's super quick, man. I really like it. I don't know that I'm gonna pick it up anytime soon, but it sparks a little interest.
Well, they hit the price more than perfectly. Like
Yeah,
anybody who was going to look at this and assume double digits, $10,000, probably are going cool lens. Probably not for me though. I'll spend the extra 2 or 3,000 and get first party performance and reliability.
yeah, but we're talking about
$1,000.
we're
That's less than half of the Sony.
yeah, we're talking about like $8,000 less than getting the Sony 600 f4.
That's
Um,
that's convincing for I think a significant. I think they're going to have a hard time keeping up with the orders on this lens.
Yeah, well, and they definitely are. That's really really affordable in the like hyper professional super zoom stuff, or
Yeah.
super prime stuff, because this is Sigma's ethos of let's make super fast prime replacements, like up the entire,
Yeah.
28 to 45 f1.8,
Mhm.
uh, the whole deal, 28 to 105 f2.8.
Yeah.
Right up to a 300 to 600 f4, which is just crazy. And it's about the same size as the 600 f4, which is outstanding. Size is similar. The weight, I think it is heavier. But um, moving on for now to the Sigma BF, I can't remember. It was Beautiful Foolishness.
Yeah.
If you are interested, you're going to have a hard time not liking Kazuto Yamaki if you go watch Petapixel's interview with him.
Everybody should.
He just seems pretty chill and like really fun. Um, he has like a childlike exploration that comes off when he's talking about what he's trying to do.
Hmm.
His father ran this company. Like they did a bunch of. He's been a part of it forever, so he feels very invested in the direction of what they're doing, and we were basically just like kind of dogpiling the BF in our Discord, more or less. We were like, this is crazy. Why did they even do it? Blah blah blah. And then
I feel bad for starting that.
yeah, well, yeah. And then, but I mean, other people agreed. I think I can't remember who said. Was it Mike or something that said this looks like some like people at Sigma have never seen human hands or whatever. Like then you listen to him talk about it, and it basically was just I wanted to make a very simple camera that made me want
Yeah.
to take photos, that like doesn't get in my way. And I was like, there's probably an entire generation or two of young kids that probably really vibe on the
As
aesthetic,
soon as
the
he said
principle.
that,
Yeah,
I was like, "Oh, duh! These kids are holding a smartphone like this, you
yeah,
know? The BF actually has better ergonomics than what they're coming from."
right. And so, like, I think the box camera thing is fine because people are okay with the X100 and you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
space. They're like, how about we do the like form factor, but we stay away from the vintage, which I think is a good go because I think if they were like going to come out with an Olympus looking like pen, people would be like, Sigma, why? So you just jumped on the
Well,
bandwagon? Like it
well,
would,
right. That would be what it is because
yeah,
Sigma. Nobody really has memories of holding a Sigma 35 millimeter body that they absolutely loved. You
right,
know,
right, yeah.
they were never there.
Yeah. Well, they had glass. They've been making lenses for a really long time. But but yeah, anyway, I want to find out how I can play with one just on that basis alone. Like grab
Sure.
like the 45 f2 or whatever contemporary
Mm-hmm.
whatever they call it, the eye lens or whatever, get it in silver and then just like try to reframe my mind around what photography can be because it's one of the only things I think genuinely besides a Leica that's unapologetically trying to do something,
Yeah,
which I think we should probably be more supportive of as a
we should be.
community than not. Because
Yeah,
what you get is, if they don't do that, is a bunch of R52s and A9s and Z8s, and they're all perfect, and all you have to do is choose who you want to fight for, and then
yeah,
it's
yep.
just it's boring.
It took me like 5 minutes to come around and go, oh wait, we really need this in the industry. Actually, we
Yeah,
need people who are willing to take these kinds of risks, and I think they'll sell. If we didn't say it, it's a $2,000 camera. The L mount is growing, and actually, it growing at a pace where I think the L mount is going to be very well equipped for this camera, and it probably already is. I
yeah,
really don't
oh yeah,
have a. I mean, you've got just the I series of the new Sigma lenses. Well, I guess they're not new, but they re-released them in the silver color to match
right.
the
Well,
BF.
you have every DGDN, you
Yeah,
have all of the Panasonic,
yeah,
and you have even the Leica SL stuff.
yeah,
It's stacked. It's
yeah.
altogether across the L mount alliance. It's like catching up to Sony's ridiculous, like 60 to 70 lenses or whatever they have.
Yeah, so I can't fault anybody for getting into the L mount platform anymore. At first, it was like, well, what is there? But they have definitely shown
Yep.
their commitment to it. And then at the same time, it's machined out of a solid block of aluminum.
Yeah.
So the build rigidity, it's going to feel pretty good. It's going to feel like a solidly built camera. And it takes them 7 hours to machine that block.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was all inclusive of like component assembly and everything, but
Sure.
7 hours on one camera, that's no joke.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you have a fleet of CNC machines, it makes a little bit more sense. But
Yeah.
I do work in a machine shop, so it was cool to see they actually included some pretty dope 5-axis footage of them being machined and stuff like that, and it was pretty epic. I I like it. Obviously, it doesn't have the feature set of a pro body, but I everybody reported that the like settings thing was super intuitive, which blew my mind. I guess I'd have to touch it and play with
Oh,
it. Where you just like pretty much everybody that I heard talk about it was like, yeah, it was pretty easy to get into and function. You like
cool.
swipe over to aperture, you swipe over to ISO, you swipe over to whatever. Um, and I guess that felt really good. The buttons look like they're probably pretty okay. At
Hmm.
first, I thought the thumb grip kind of looked like a glue-on like nail, like and so I didn't love it, but I think it kind of now that I've looked at it a little bit more, it looks like it's probably a little bit more usable and not just like a weird piece of plastic that you can set your thumb on.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's neat. It'll certainly help them have more stylistic marketing for their new lenses.
for sure.
Because I don't want to see an FP ever again. It feels like it's a 10-year-old camera,
Right.
uh, and things like that. So um, I think who was it? It was probably Chris Nichols who also said that I don't know if it's like dimpling or however they machined the texture on the
The
front.
knurling.
He said it was like pretty good. He was like it was
Yeah.
surprisingly comfortable and functional.
Wow.
So that's kind of sick. I'd like to try. I'd like to see you try it. and compare it to something like the
The
ZF,
ZF, yeah.
and see if
I
like
thought of that.
a
I was
couple
like, I
of
can't harp on the ergonomics here.
right, yeah, you have a metal body that's a block as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so super cool stuff. Um, the Sony release that I was really excited for. Okay, so let's go to the 16 is less important. It is what it is. It does really well. Nate of the Wild, if you're familiar with him, he's a Sony ambassador, shooter, etc., who does like great landscape stuff, great wildlife stuff. Um, he, his content kind of annoys me sometimes, but it is content, so content is content. But he does fantastic images, and he actually did kind of like a blind. Somebody said something like the 21.8 is a once in a generation lens. Like the 16
I did
makes
see that.
the 16 makes no sense. And then he posted 3 images of the 14, the 16, and the 20. And he was like, I don't know, look at these. Which one do you think is which? And because they were saying that the 16 just has like tons
Oh,
of
was this the
distortion.
star images?
Yeah. And
Yeah,
the
I see
16 is clean as heck compared to the other
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
So he was like, and I was like, oh, I love just roasting somebody who's never used a lens and is trying to like pontificate to people on the internet. Because he crushed them without doing anything besides like I have ran all of these lenses like professionally, so
Yeah.
shut up, I guess. Like it's a sub $1,000 fast ultra wide prime. It was very boring as a release, but it appears to be a really high functioning lens, and that's cool.
Yeah.
I currently have a G Master 24, which I think I'm probably just going to stick to for that like kind of wide astro. Does well enough. Has
Yeah.
plenty of distortion, but I could see myself flirting with the 16 eventually if I want to go wide again.
As someone who's came from, I mean, Tokina 11 to 16, we've come a long way as far as wide angle quality goes.
Yeah.
I honestly think between 20 and 24 is such a good sweet spot focal length for astrophotography.
Yeah.
I never feel like I need to go much wider than 20. And even 20 sometimes feels a bit wide when I'm doing Milky Way stuff these days.
Yeah.
Maybe that's preference, but I used to think like wider, wider, wider. And
Yeah.
nowadays it's like just focus on what's great about the composition, you know?
Correct. The thing that I would say if I didn't own a 20 or a 24 and I was looking for an astro lens, one, this is cleaner.
Oh,
but,
for sure.
But I also wouldn't use it if I was going to like a, let's say like a A7 III or something, or the if I was going to use any of the higher megapixel ones, I would probably consider the 16 over the 20 because I can get a lot of cropping. It's a really functional lens. Also, if you only are on a crop body and you know you want to get to that space in full frame
sure.
eventually, epic for that. Sub $1,000, you're going to have that 24 mil kind of field of view on a crop body. So stellar to have something you can move into while, being that sharp and that good.
I do think it's also probably a pretty great walk around vlogging lens. At 20 sometimes I can do it with a 20 on like a little tripod or something stretched way out. 16 I'd feel a lot more comfortable with.
Yeah, I have albatross wings, so I've vlogged on a 35 mil perfectly fine.
Depends on your own length.
Yeah, so 24 is great. 16 is almost too wide, but Terry Warfield did do some vlog tests, and he said it's like absolutely the best vlog lens that he's ever used. So
yeah, I would imagine it's fine.
All the vlog era 16 to 35 users be damned, because that's a chunky thing to walk around with.
Sure.
But if you did like the ZV or the ZV1, not the ZV1, whatever the ZV full frame A7S thing is.
I thought you were right.
The 12 megapixel, that and the 16, that's sick. That's a done deal. Going into the 400 to 800, which was insane. I thought it was like made up when the rumor spiked, but then I was also like, that's incredible. Like that would be my dream. F8's a little slow, but it's better than, using a teleconverter on the F 600. However, I watched what I could of people actually using the lens. Ted Forbes did a video, which was weird because he doesn't do anything with like these he like took some shots outside and stuff. It was so weird. It was like the weirdest Ted Forbes video, and I love all of the art of photography, but that one was strange. He just probably had that because he was like, sure, I'll do it. Yeah. Can't fault him there, but he really kind of harped on the like the bokeh, the out of focus highlights were gross. on his
Wow.
copy. And he said the whole time, he's like, hey, look it, I don't really play with lenses like this, and this could completely be a like my copy issue. So go ahead and watch everybody else's stuff if this is a concern to you or whatever. But then I watched a couple other videos, and it's really messy. Like, it's messy enough that I wouldn't want the shot, especially if you're like heavily wooded and you're kind of like, let's say you're going full body on a deer at 800 and you're trying to have like nice background. It was bad. It was like
Hmm.
really, it has like a ring almost. Like it's like I don't know, something about it was really off.
I've only seen a couple sample images from Jared Polin at the zoo. I think he just released some bird shots, and the only way I can agree is because he was at the zoo, you could see all the fences behind, and it was so distracting, all the
Yeah,
fence lines behind the bird.
yeah,
So I'd like to see more. I'm very interested because the stuff I saw from Ollie Nielsen looked fine. I didn't think
yeah,
it was remarkable as far as like what the images ended up looking like.
yeah,
I do think it's great that you can get 800 F8s. F8 is fine. You know, I stopped down to what is it, F7.1 or F7.2. I stopped down to that often enough on the 150-600, and I don't feel like I'm like missing out too much.
right.
So I think F8 at 800 is just serviceable.
Yeah,
You know,
when it's sunny, I go down to F9 and F11, especially if I'm close enough to like a small bird. Then it's gonna blow out the background anyway because I'm
yeah.
at 600 and relatively close focus.
But
10
I'm
meters or whatever.
interested to see what Ted Forbes got because I liked Ollie's stuff enough.
Yeah.
So maybe in different environments the effect is a little bit too much.
Yeah, and listen, this was absolutely because the shots also weren't good, and were because he admitted he was like, I just took some test shots of some stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Um, so they weren't like, it wasn't like photography. It was literally like a couple of lens test shots.
Sure.
Obviously at 800, you're starting to deal with a diminishing returns on um, atmospheric haze,
Yeah.
on heat, on like everything. And heat is
Yeah.
something that I don't think people talk enough about, especially for beginners,
Agree.
because I had the realization not that long ago. And so you're looking at people that are like, I'm so frustrated that this new lens that I got is brutal. It like is never sharp.
Right.
But at even a 400, if it's like 90 degrees out
Mm-hmm.
and there's anything doing mirage, your photo's not sharp. Your photo's going to look muddy.
Yeah.
And it's brutal. Atmospheric conditions when you're super telephoto is going to really, really affect your game.
Do you remember when I first got the 150-600 and
Yeah.
I was trying to shoot eagles out of my car
Yeah.
and the heat pouring out of my car window was
Yeah.
doing all kinds of things that made me think I was getting
Yeah.
soft images.
Well,
So
and
yeah, heat is a bigger issue than people think.
yeah, and off of just the metal. Um, so the heat from inside, the heat from your motor. Like I was shooting out front, like out of my window towards the front of the car when we were shooting some like horned larks not too long ago, and I was like, and it was freezing out. We were just driving around trying to find some birds, and we had to jump out because like you cannot get a photo from your car when it's that
Yeah.
cold out and your car is heated up to like 85 degrees.
Which is a bummer because a car acts as a great blind. Most wildlife are pretty used to the visual of a car these days,
Yeah,
but getting out of a car is a risk.
yeah, it's pretty brutal. So you can get trash images just off
It's
of
true.
Mirage.
Yeah.
And 800 is going to make that worse too. So like that much worse. All, adding more optics, adding
Yeah.
more focal length, and adding more conditions is always going to affect the sharpness of your image.
The distance between you
Yeah,
and the
and
subject.
right, the further and further it gets, so you're like, okay, cool. Now I have 800. I can shoot this thing that's 300 yards away. Well, kind of not really.
Are
You're
you gonna want to?
you're still looking, if you're looking at like good wildlife photos and you're like, I just can't do it, it's because these people are in blinds on tripods. Because again, even if you're at 1/4000th of a second, if it's just you're making bursts and you move, your optical stabilization moves at the same time, and the animal moves just a little bit, that's enough to make that 1/4000th of a second make him just a little blurry. And you can't
Yep.
tell if it's motion blur. You can't tell if you missed focus at those focal lengths. You just can't tell why the image isn't sharp, and it's very frustrating. I
Kind of like dialing in why your coffee tastes a little bit bad.
right,
There's
yeah.
so many variables, you got to eliminate one by one.
Yeah. And it's like only if you get into a good, like 60 yards is not close, especially for small
Right.
birds.
Yeah.
50 yards, 25 yards is actually still pretty tough.
Yeah.
Um, for us, if you're doing like finches or something, or
Above being 10 or 20 feet away. Much more than that is a struggle for just about anything.
yeah. So it's like cool. You have all these like these MMs, if you will. I added so many more MMs to my lens, and it's not delivering because it gets harder, and you just have to get everything right.
Yep.
So that's
As
where
far as the lens go, it looks fine though. Like I think it's a little pricey, but it looks
I
fine.
didn't know that it was gonna be $3,000. It's like $2,800 US, and I was like, dude,
Yeah.
that's brutal because it's not giving you like I get more from the 600 in crop mode.
Oh, does the throw? I really liked the short throw from 4 to 8. Is it similar to the 2 to 6?
The 2 to 600's throw is like super short.
Okay, I really envy that.
I know the Sigma's pretty brutal, but yeah,
Yeah,
I can do it with like just a
and the internal zoom,
yeah
love that.
yeah. It's just so nice. The balance is epic for that.
Yeah,
And I don't think the weights are so different between the Sigma and the Sony, but because you're shifting so much weight, it feels so much heavier. The
yeah,
Sigma feels so much heavier because it's shifting weight.
right.
But anyway, yeah. So it's not it's not as exciting as I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be a
Yeah,
lens that I was going to try to save up for a couple months and then like have it for bird season. But I
well,
just don't
I
think
would
I
say
need it.
keep watching for people who are using it because
I'm gonna
you
keep
know,
looking at, but I just $3,000. I'm good, man. I got the.
it's tough.
You can get the freaking 200 to 600 close to 1,500 all day used or 1,400
That's
all day
halfway to a
used.
300 to 600, my friend.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean exactly. If I'm gonna spend $3,000 on a 400 to 800 that's f8, why don't I buy two of them or just get the 300 to 600? It's a dude. It's so sick. We're living in the best time ever to get into birding. Uh, it's pretty dope.
Honestly, we are though.
Yeah, it's fun. Um, all right, so we're a little over, but I wanted to round out this gear-centric episode with news that from multiple sources that the A7 IV is postponed.
5.
The A7 V, the A7 V is postponed,
Yep.
which is really brutal because the A7 IV, as we say in almost every episode, is really long in the tooth. We haven't got an A7S IV, so we were kind of like everybody is banking on the A7 V just coming out, especially after the Z6 III, because the Z6 III, even with its caveats, makes buying an A7 IV in 2025 feel redundant and really tough.
Hard to recommend.
Yeah, like you're like, oh, okay, well that thing does everything. Um, what does this mean for you? Because you were
Yeah.
like hopeful. You were like, dude, I need to upgrade this freaking A7 IV yesterday.
Well, it doesn't help that now I've split my mounts. I'm on 2 different systems, and I have the ability to buy lenses for this ZF. And do I want to invest more into the Nikon system? And so we were talking about this, and I'm like, oh man, I really, really wanted to be on something a little bit more beefed up for spring migration.
Yeah,
At the very least, a busy summer with birds. And if these rumors are true, I don't want to wait until fall
yeah,
to pre-order or put an order in for an A7 V, and it might get here in the winter.
right.
In the past when I pre-ordered the A7 IV, it came very quickly. So I'm not going to say that it wouldn't come in the fall if they open it up in the fall, but I want to be on something new for spring migration and summer. And so I am tallying up the value of all these Sony lenses that I have and making some strong considerations for a Z8.
Yeah,
I think a Z8 makes a ton of sense coming from something like an A7 IV. And if Sony just has some sense, they can't be thinking of me when they're talking about,
right.
what one of the rumors I heard was they're looking at trying to look at pricing for what is it, the R6 Mark III,
Yeah, whatever Canon's next body will be in that range.
which I think is valid enough. But for me, I just can't. I don't want to wait that long.
You know why that's scary? Why that rumor is scary to me? Again,
Right.
I'm in marketing. I think a lot about how we price our stuff. I just released a very premium product for my company, and I was like, we looked at everybody, right? This means they're trying to find a justification for making it more expensive than the Z6 III. So we're
More expensive? Oh,
right.
so they're trying to find a sweet spot between?
Well, they're trying to hope that Canon's going to be like, dude, we cannot release a $2,500 camera in 2025. Like, sorry. So Sony can go, okay, we can, because Canon and Sony are both well above the user base and the market for a Nikon. Nikon had to be really competitive,
Yeah.
and they released that for $24.99, and Sony probably went, what the? We were gonna go to $3,000, dude. What are you doing?
Yeah, you might be right about that.
and and that could hurt. That again, not that it would be unfair, not that it would be unreasonable to go to $3,000, but for somebody like you and me, what making that camera $3,000 is why wouldn't I spend a little bit more on the better camera?
Right.
If I'm going to spend $3,000 new on the A7 IV, well, that's my ticket to just getting the A9 III and shutting the hell up.
Right.
Especially if I can get some kind of discount now that it's been out for a while. And again, these cameras are not going to be better than anything. Nothing's better. It's balancing the things you want.
Yeah.
So like the A1 II, stupid names. The A1 II is going to be an amazing camera for a really
Yeah.
long time. You considering the Z8, that camera is not going to be bad anytime soon.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
like I keep saying with my A7S III, like, yeah, try and give me a reason to buy a new video camera when this does all. This is in Hollywood level movies now. They use this sensor on the opening sequence of Severance season 2. Like,
Mm.
if I can't get it done with the A7S III, I need to quit. So it's the same kind of deal. Like if you
Yeah.
get a Z8 and you're not getting good wildlife photos, no camera's going to help you.
Right.
Nothing in this planet will help you. But it has
Yeah.
all the features you want, right? So
It's got a lot of features I want. I mean, I know if that sensor's even similar, and it sounds like it is to the D850 sensor, I'm gonna love those files.
Yeah.
I got some of my best work, the sharpest, the best colors. Oh my gosh, just the raw files were so beautiful out of the D850. If it's even close to that, I'm gonna love the files. I've mostly convinced myself that I'm gonna get a Z8. It's just the lens configuration.
Yeah.
How do I want to break that out? Because the value of my current lens is roughly $5,000.
yeah,
And so what it's going to take is moving a lot of Sony glass. And then do I get a 180 to 600, or do I adapt the 150 to 600 with a better adapter? Do I want to take that risk? I'm going over all of these things. So if you watching, listening, are somewhere where you can leave a comment, let me know. Does the Z8 work great with a good adapter? Should I even bother with the 150 to 600 Sony adapted to it? What are your thoughts? Because I'm like all over the place. I miss being on Nikon systems. I mostly am just nostalgic for how I felt using the Z850.
Yeah.
I
Well-
think the Z8 is going to get me back to that.
yeah. Well, here's the thing. Here's two things that I can note. If you're still in the window where you can return the Viltrox, I think you should, and you should get that better adapter, because or you should just get the adapter if you just want to have that secondary adapter for
Yeah,
your little.
I think
your
you're
lens.
100% right.
Because that will give you all of the information you need to know if you can start birding with the 150 to 600 on a better body,
Mhm.
and you're not really getting caveats. If you can get it, barring the discomfort, to feel like you're shooting your A7 IV with the ZF, why wouldn't it be better on the Z8, right? Because autofocus
Correct.
is better. Everything on that camera is incredible. So that's like the big thing that I probably would look at, because then you get to do all your glass on the ZF and really kind of dial in, is this as good? Is this fine? Especially if the 28 to 105 is already close, but you can get a beefier mount that you're like, okay, this adapter
Yeah.
doesn't scare me. This adapter no longer is my issue.
Yeah.
So definitely recommend, because that will solve all your problems, because
True.
you could just sell a body and like maybe a lens and get towards something you would prefer.
Yep.
Secondarily, if you're listening to this and you're relatively new to the world of mirrorless DSLR, etc., I came from Canon, which had the best colors forever. It was almost objectively in the meta of cameras that, quote unquote, it had the best color. However, the thing that Nikon did before anybody else, and is the stepping stone to why all of these creators love Sony, is down to like the D750, down to maybe even the D700, definitely the 800 and the 810. That is when they were the king of recovering shadows. So
Oh yes.
their raw files were built different. Like the people that basically paved the way for kind of the like lifted shadows, crushed black, like really beautiful Instagrammable portraits. Those were Nikon dudes for sure.
Yeah.
And those files are good. I remember editing other people's photos because I used to do that a lot when I was getting into cameras. My buddy had a D750 and would send me car stuff and portrait stuff. Epic, really, really good files. And I have no reason to believe that the Z8 would be any different.
And I will tell you, I remember being on that timeline, and it was the D850 that included the BSI sensor
Yeah.
for the first time. That was like, it was already good and easy to clean up, and it just got infinitely better. So when Sony started offering these BSI sensors to everyone else, that's when everything else got better and easier to clean up shadow wise.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yes, D810. It was beautiful,
Yeah.
and you had 36 megapixels, and it was
Which is
like
crazy back
you
then.
kind of got the best of both worlds before anyone else was really on top of that shadow recovery.
Yeah. There was a moment where, and this is why the ethos of, or the meta of Nikon being the professional camera was, because they were at the top of the DSLR game. I think Canon kind of they did a really good job at the content creator thing,
Hmm.
because they had the best video at, out of anybody that was
Hmm.
brought to consumers first. So I think a lot of people picture Canon, but if you knew professional photographers, if you knew people doing like high-end weddings, if you knew any wildlife landscape guys, if you knew like a lot of journalists and stuff like that, it is like uncontestable that it was the professional camera user. F class was brutal. Like you just feel like you could throw it into, Mount Vesuvius and it would be fine. Like
People still buy F glass now to put it on Z
yeah,
mount cameras
because
they're just so good.
and they're bulky and they're trusted and it does the thing. So other than I've always hated and really really hated their 70 to 200, which is why I never shot Nikon, but
Oh,
because it was like a 70 to 180 and
oh
it
yeah,
was
I
really
remember seeing those
expensive and it
differences.
was never telephoto enough. But and I was like the 70 to 200 L series lens is why I'm such a like this is always going to be the guy for me. I'm actually excited to be running this for birds even because it's so freaking light and
Hmm.
I have access to it again.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I'm really excited to see what you think, what happens, whatever that M company that apparently has like a better mount is. I hope it works out. I really like. It'd be so nice that if you wouldn't have to flip everything to do everything, you could just get rid of a
Yeah.
body that you're like falling out of love with, and
Yeah.
so especially
I Yeah, I mean this A74 is still got a lot of utility, but I'm getting ready to buy a car. After that big financial thing is when I'm gonna try to free up some money. So if you see me trying to sell some gear in the next 2 to 3 weeks, you know I'm making a move.
yeah, I'm excited. We'll be talking about it. Um, we're probably gonna, well, actually, to finish up this episode, in exactly 14 days, we'll be going to
Oh,
Tulum. So we likely won't have an episode next week, and I won't be able to have a next episode until I'm back from there. So
sure.
uh, for those of you who don't like the gear talk and stuck in with this episode, the next episode will be very photography. It'll be basically only photography, outside of updates of our kit. So uh,
If you have the ability, post some stories though,
I'll be doing whatever I can. Yeah.
so that you
Um,
guys can check the socials because I'm gonna be checking for every story you post.
yeah, we'll be going pretty gangbusters. I mean, it's basically a birding trip. So
That's what I'm
I'm
looking
like
for.
I want tacos and birds, and we're gonna make it happen. So
Exciting.
yeah, we'll see what happens. But I'll try to think up some challenges and stuff. Again, get in the Discord. It got a little slow because everybody's busy and it's super cold right now. But we're gonna keep chatting. We're gonna keep trying to cultivate some good photo discussions, some challenges, stuff like that, just to get each other shooting.
Hmm.
Experience stuff. I have grown out of being so gear obsessed because we're talking so much about shooting.
Yeah.
And it's, if you don't talk to people about the art and the process, and you're not doing the art in the process, you're going to keep fixating on the gear, because that's what social media is doing. Because
It's very true.
that's where the money is for these creators. Which I'm not going to ever, poo-poo a creator, but you're not going to get the art unless you're doing it and you're talking about it and you're surrounding yourself with it. So
I had a feeling the Discord could go this way, like best case scenario, and it is going that way, and I
Yeah.
love it.
yeah, so we're gonna still heavily curate it. So I'm gonna try and make sure like I have a zero tolerance for people being jerks, for getting really off the wall stuff. I'm not gonna let people be in that. But it's going to be a very democratic process. We have 3 admins, me, Ryan, and David, and it's not just going to be, power happy people. We're going to try and just allow nice, awesome stuff to happen. So
Yeah.
let's make it happen and get out there and start shooting. Thanks for listening.
See you guys next time.